Hi, everyone. Welcome to a deep dive into the Community Eligibility Provision, hosted by the Food Research and Action Center. I'm Steve Hayward, FRAC's Communications Manager. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few brief housekeeping items. We expect this webinar to run about 45 minutes. We are recording the presentation and will send the recording and slides in a follow-up email. Closed captioning is available. To turn captions on, click the CC button in the bottom taskbar and select English as the spoken language. We'll have time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. To ask a question at any time, please use the Q&A panel, also in the bottom taskbar. With that, I'll pass it off to Erin Kennedy Heisem, Senior Child Nutrition Policy Analyst at FRAC. Take it away, Erin.
Thanks, Steve, and hi, everyone. As Steve mentioned, my name is Erin. I'm a policy analyst here at FRAC, and I'm excited to join you today to have a deep dive into the community eligibility provision. Next slide, please. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with FRAC, we are the Food Research and Action Center, the leading national nonprofit organization working to end hunger here in the United States by strengthening and expanding the federal nutrition assistance programs. We do this through three main ways. We conduct research on the programs, we advocate for federal, state, and local policies that strengthen and expand access to the programs, and we provide technical assistance and training like this webinar here today. Next slide, please. So we have a lot to talk about, not a lot of time as always. So we're going to jump right on in with going over a brief history of the community eligibility provision. We will highlight some of the top benefits that community eligibility brings to students, families, and schools. We're going to do a little deeper dive into the rules and regulations, how schools can participate in community eligibility, how they are reimbursed. We'll highlight some of FRAC's resources, and then we'll talk about some current threats to school meals. As Steve mentioned, we will save time at the end of the webinar for some Q&A. So please enter your questions at any time at the little chat or question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen. Next slide, please. So what is community eligibility? Community eligibility, or CEP, is an option under the National School Lunch Program that allows high-need, high-poverty schools to offer school meals to all students at no charge. It is instrumental in the fight against childhood hunger. Community eligibility has been proven to reduce childhood food insecurity, to reduce stigma, and to strengthen school meal programs. Next slide, please. So looking at a brief history, community eligibility was authorized in the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010. It was phased in gradually, state by state, over the next few years until it became available nationwide in the 2014-2015 school year. Last school year, USDA released a final rule that lowered the participation threshold, meaning more schools were eligible to adopt the community eligibility provision. That new threshold became available nationwide this school year, 2024-2025. Next slide, please. So let's talk about some of the benefits. Community eligibility is wildly popular, and we'll discuss some participation data in a few slides. But why is it so popular? Community eligibility really is a win for students and their families, school nutrition departments, and the larger school community. Speaking directly about the student, we know that community eligibility reduces childhood hunger and strengthens child food security. By reducing the stigma that's often present in cafeterias when we categorize children by their household income, CEP increases participation in school breakfast and school lunch, and then as a result of that, it increases students' access to all the benefits of school meals. We know that school meals are some of the healthiest meals that children receive in a given day, and school meals have been shown to support students' health and academic achievement. When schools adopt the community eligibility provision, when they offer school meals to all children at no cost, they are increasing students' access to these nutritious meals and all of the benefits that school meals bring to the child. Next slide, please. The community eligibility also has numerous benefits for the families and households themselves. When a school adopts community eligibility, they no longer collect school meal applications. We'll discuss this in more detail a little later on, but community eligibility schools rely on data matching rather than school meal applications to determine free and reduced rates within the school. Eliminating this application reduces that paperwork burden on families. School meal applications can be very confusing, particularly for families who might be piecing together a variety of different incomes just to make ends meet. When schools adopt CEP, they no longer rely on that school meal application. Community eligibility schools offer all students school meals at no charge. There's no more meal charges. Families no longer have to scrape together 30 cents, 40 cents for a reduced price meal. They no longer have to send money with their student or make sure that there's money in their meal account balances. All children are eligible and offered a school meal at no charge. This in turn stretches the household food budget. Research shows us that when families live in school districts that participate in the community eligibility provision, household food security is strengthened because parents are able to send their children to school knowing they will get a nutritious school meal, and they're able to stretch that food budget to feed themselves and other members of the household. Research has also shown us that the household grocery shopping is changed as well. When a school adopts community eligibility, families buy better quality meals at the grocery store for their own dinner tables. Next slide, please. The community eligibility is also a tremendous benefit to the school nutrition operation. We see that community eligibility reduces the administrative burden associated with school meal applications. Since schools are no longer required to collect, process, and verify school meal applications, that frees staff time to do other things in school nutrition world. We see schools that adopt community eligibility all of a sudden have more time for other initiatives, such as farm to school, meeting with local farmers and agricultural producers, doing staff trainings and culinary trainings, meeting with students and their parents to develop culturally diverse and culturally responsive menus. CEP also improves operational efficiencies. Children are able to move through lunch lines faster, and schools are able to adopt innovative breakfast models that bring breakfast into the classroom and increase participation in the school breakfast program. And when you no longer charge for meals, you eliminate school meal debt. We have heard since the end of the pandemic era waivers that had allowed all schools to offer all students free school meals. School meal debt has increased tremendously since then, and many schools are burdened with this debt. Switching to community eligibility eliminates school meal debt and allows the schools to operate without having to worry about chasing down unpaid debt. Next slide, please. Schools experience the benefits of offering all students free school meals, and they don't want to lose those benefits. Last school year, 60% of schools offered free meals to their students, either through CEP or through state policy supporting healthy school meals for all. There is huge momentum behind healthy school meals for all. It is wildly popular amongst all different types of parents and communities. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at the participation. Before we get into rules and regulations, who's doing this? Well, the truth is schools in every single state have embraced community eligibility. Looking at the data from last school year, over 7,000 school districts and over 47,000 schools participated in the community eligibility provision, reaching more than 23 million children nationwide. Next slide, please. As we look at this trend over time, we see tremendous growth, particularly in the last 2 school years. As I mentioned earlier, community eligibility became available nationwide in the 2014-2015 school year. Last school year, over 47,000 schools participated. That is 1 out of every 2, or 50% of schools that operate the National School Lunch Program. 50% of schools that operate the National School Lunch Program use CEP to offer free school meals to all of their students. Next slide, please. All right, so let's get into it. How does community eligibility actually work? So Community eligibility is part of the National School Lunch Program, and schools can participate either individually as an individual school, as a group or a cluster of schools within the school district, or across the entire district, district-wide, if they meet eligibility requirements, which we'll get into. Participating schools must offer both school breakfast and lunch at no charge to all students. Once a school adopts CEP, they are enrolled in a CEP cycle. That cycle can last up to 4 consecutive years. At the end of that cycle, eligible schools can renew and begin a new CEP cycle, and if ineligible schools can qualify for a grace year. If schools are interested in adopting CEP, they need to notify their state agency by June 30th of the prior year. That's why we call this time right now CEP season. This is when schools are looking at their budgets, they are looking at their numbers, and they're deciding if CEP makes sense for them for next school year. Next slide, please. So what makes a school eligible? Eligibility is based on something called the identified student percentage. Schools, groups of schools within a single district or an entire school district can participate in CEP if their identified student percentage, or their ISP, is greater than 25%. And it has to be greater than 25% as of April 1st. So the data must be reflective as of April 1st. Next slide, please. Identified student percentage. Identified student percentage, or identified students, are a subset of children who would qualify for free and reduced price meals if the school accepted school meal applications. Identified students are those children who are automatically eligible for free school meals because they participate in another program or they fall into a specific category. So children who participate in SNAP, TANF, the food distribution program on Indian reservations, or in most states, Medicaid, as well as children who are experiencing homelessness, are migrants, or runaways, or those who are enrolled in Head Start, are automatically eligible for free school meals. These are your identified students. In order to calculate your identified student percentage, it's a simple division and multiplication. You take your total number of identified students, you divide it by your total enrollment, and you multiply by 100. If that percentage is equal to or above 25%, you can participate in CEP. Next slide, please. So let's go through a few examples of how this identified student percentage is calculated. Here we have 2 schools in the same school district. School ABC has 220 identified students. Remember, these are those students who are automatically eligible for free school meals because they either fit a specific category or they already participate in another means-tested program. So 220 out of 420 total students are identified. When you divide 220 by 420 and multiply by 100, you get an ISP of over 52%. This school, School ABC, can participate in CEP. School 123 has 60 identified students. These are the children that are automatically eligible for free school meals because they participate in another means-tested program. Their total enrollment is 250 students. 60 divided by 250 times 100 is 24%. School 123 cannot participate in CEP on its own. It is below that threshold. Schools are not allowed to round up to meet the minimum ISP. However, schools can be grouped together, and if the collective ISP, identified student percentage, is greater than 25%, then they may be able to participate. Next slide, please. So let's talk about grouping, right? As I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, schools can participate in CEP either individually as a single school, as a group or cluster of schools within a single district, or district-wide if the collective identified student percentage is above 25%. Next slide, please. What is the power of grouping? Grouping is really about local control and local decision-making. If a district decides that they want to participate as an individual school, they might want one school in their district to participate. It's really a way to try out or pilot community eligibility to see if it works for their district and their community and their school nutrition finances. Schools could also be grouped or clustered together within a single district. This allows schools to decide which schools can participate in CEP in a way that makes sense for them. For example, a district might want to cluster together a feeder system, meaning the elementary schools that go to a specific middle school, that go to a specific high school, could all be one group in CEP, providing a continuity of meal service throughout that child's entire educational career. This increases the reach of CEP and brings the benefits of school meals to more children. Or the district can participate district-wide if their collective ISP is greater than 25%. This is the most operationally efficient form of implementing community eligibility. It eases communications with parents and the community, and it brings the benefits of CEP to the entire school district. Next slide, please. So let's look at that ISP calculation again, but this time factor in grouping. As we saw on the previous slide, school ABC can adopt community eligibility individually because their identified student percentage is above 25%. It's 52%. School 123 was not able to implement community eligibility because their individual identified student percentage was below the participation threshold. If the two schools are grouped together, they have a total identified student number of 280 students. Their total enrollment between the two schools is 670 students. You do the same calculation that you would individually, but this time as a group. So 280 divided by 670 times 100 is over 41%. So as a group, school ABC and school 123 are able to implement community eligibility. Next slide, please. So the identified student percentage is important for two reasons. One, it determines whether or not a school, group of schools, or districts are eligible to participate in CEP. And two, it is directly tied to federal reimbursement. CEP schools are reimbursed based on their identified student percentage. So the higher the ISP, the higher the poverty within a school, the more federal reimbursement that school receives. The lower the ISP, the less poverty within a school, the less federal reimbursement a CEP school receives. All of this is based on the ISP times a multiplier of 1.6. So let's take it school by school. School ABC had an individual identified student percentage of 52%. You take 52%, multiply it by that factor of 1.6, and that is the percentage of meals that are going to be reimbursed at the federal free rate. So in school ABC, 52% times 1.6 equals 83%. That means in school ABC, 83% of the meals served are reimbursed at the higher federal free rate, and the remaining 17% of meals served are reimbursed at the lower federal paid rate. If these two schools decided to participate as a group, you use the group identified student percentage to determine the federal reimbursement. So collectively, school ABC and school 123 had a group identified student percentage of 41%. 41% times 1.6 equals 66%. So as a group in both schools, 66% of the meals served would be reimbursed at the federal free rate, with 34% of the meals served reimbursed at the lower federal paid rate. Next slide, please. It's important to remember that the higher the ISP, the more federal reimbursement, the lower the ISP, the less federal reimbursement. And you have a few examples of that here on this slide. At 62.5% identified student percentage, 100% of the meals served are reimbursed at the higher federal free rate. At lower percentages, such as 40%, you see that only 64% of the meals served are reimbursed at that higher federal free rate, with 36% reimbursed at the lower federal paid rate. And then at the lowest eligibility threshold, 25%, only 40% of the meals served are reimbursed at the higher federal free rate, with 60% of the meals served at the lowest federal paid rate. Next slide, please. So it's important to remember this. The higher the ISP, the more federal reimbursement. The lower the ISP, the less federal reimbursement. And that's why we see the highest adoption rates in schools that have the highest poverty or highest identified student percentage. Looking at CEP adoption for last school year, nearly 50% of the schools that participated in community eligibility last school year were above 60% ISP, meaning they received 100% federal free reimbursement. That also means that 50% of the schools that participated in CEP last school year were below that 60% threshold. So they received some federal free reimbursement and some percentage of their meals were reimbursed at the lower federal paid rate. Next slide, please. Okay, so that is really the nitty-gritty of how community eligibility works. I know there's some questions coming through. We're going to go over some of our resources and current advocacy efforts here on the next few slides, and then we'll get to your questions. So as a reminder, if you have any questions about anything that I just went over, I know it was a lot of math, feel free to drop them in the Q&A function on the bottom of the taskbar, and we'll get to them at the end. So FRAC has a variety of resources and research available on our website. You can see, oh yeah, we can go back. We have time. Steve, can you go back to the slide with the multiplier? Yeah, okay. I'm glad I saw that chat from up. All right, so this is a lot, so we'll go through it again. Yeah, we can start right here. So remember, ISP is your identified student percentage. It is the percent of your enrollment, the percent of students who are automatically eligible for free school meals because they participate in another means-tested program such as SNAP, or because they're in a specific category. The ISP, the identified student percentage, determines whether or not a school is eligible to participate in the community eligibility provision or not. Keep in mind that schools must have at least 25% of their enrollment identified students in order to participate. Now, federal reimbursement is based on the identified student percentage and a multiplier of 1.6. So in order to calculate the percent of meals that are going to be reimbursed at the federal free rate, you take your identified student percentage and you multiply it by 1.6. That is the percentage of meals served reimbursed at the federal free rate. Excuse me. So let's take this example here with school ABC. School ABC has an identified student percentage of 52%. 52 times the 1.6 multiplier equals 83. 83% of the meals served are going to receive that higher federal free rate. 17% of the meals served are going to be reimbursed at the lower federal paid rate. So if school ABC serves 100 lunches today, 83 lunches are going to receive the higher federal free rate of reimbursement, and 17 lunches are going to receive the lower federal paid rate for reimbursement. You want to go to the next slide, Steve? I'll go through that one too. So at different identified student percentages, you're going to receive a different amount of federal reimbursement, right? So at 62.5%, this is like the sweet spot. If you have an identified student percentage of 62.5%, all of the meals you serve are reimbursed at that higher federal free rate. As your ISP drops, you're going to get less federal money. So the question is in the chat is who ends up paying for the meals that are not covered by the federal government? And that's a really fantastic question, because the school nutrition department must cover the costs or the expenses of offering all children free school meals. So if it exceeds federal reimbursement, they need to figure out how they're going to make up that difference. So that's why we see at these lower eligibility levels of 25%, we see less adoption, okay? Because it's more difficult for a school nutrition department to cover the cost of offering all students free school meals without some sort of outside subsidy. We've seen a number of states. We have 8 states currently, as well as 3 additional states that offer CEP subsidies that provide state subsidies to support schools' ability to implement the community eligibility provision. So at lower identified student percentages, at lower rates, the school is going to have a more difficult time covering that cost. Next slide, please. Okay, we're gonna go over some of our resources and current threats to school meals, and then I'll jump back to the questions. Next slide, please. So on our website, you will see our reports, our annual reports about community eligibility, as well as a number of fact sheets and other resources available to you. We have our CEP database. The CEP database is based off of our data collection from state agencies that looks at all of the schools that are eligible to participate in CEP and all of those that are adopting. And it also identifies the identified student percentage as well as the student enrollment for those schools. You can download an Excel version of that data. You can filter right on our database, looking at your state, looking at your school district, and filtering for different ISP levels to see which schools in your area are participating. Next slide, please. Okay, so CEP has been in the news a lot lately, and that is because there are current threats to school meals. The House Budget Committee Chair Arrington released a proposal at the end of January that looked at cutting $12 billion in school meals, and this includes proposed cuts to the community eligibility provision, and this would be through the budget reconciliation process. Next slide, please. The first proposal looks at increasing the participation threshold in community eligibility from the current level of 25% up to 60% identified student percentage. If this proposal were to pass, more than 24,000 schools reaching 12 million children would no longer be able to participate in the community eligibility provision. There are schools in every single state that would lose access to CEP if this proposal were to pass. Next slide, please. If you take a look at that, this was our chart looking at CEP adoption, school level adoption over the last decade. That cut to raise the identified student percentage or the eligibility threshold to participate from 25% to 60% would take us all the way back to school year 17-18. That's how many schools would no longer be eligible to participate in CEP. Next slide, please. We have a blog on our website that details this proposal and the impact it would have for each state. You can look at the number of students and number of schools that would be affected in your state through this blog. Next slide, please. We have also developed state-specific fact sheets in partnership with the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. We worked collaboratively with the center to take the data for school year 23-24, identify those schools, the student enrollment, and the school districts that would no longer be able to implement CEP if that proposal passed. So all of the schools that are participating at community eligibility below that 60% threshold that would no longer be able to if that proposal passed, all that data was analyzed and put into these fact sheets, and they're available on our website if you want to see what the impact would be in your state. Next slide, please. Another piece of the proposal that was put forth by the House for budget reconciliation is regarding income verification requirements. And this is really in non-CEP schools. So remember, in community eligibility schools, they don't collect school meal applications. In non-CEP schools, so if the first proposal were to pass and 24,000 schools lost CEP, they would return to this traditional operation of collecting school meal applications. The proposal put forth by the House would require income documentation and income verification for every student that was found eligible for free and reduced price meals, 100%. As a reference point, schools are currently verifying income for about 3% of applications. Requiring schools to do 100% verification would take school nutrition professionals out of the cafeterias, they would stop talking to farmers, it would chain them to desks and make them process paperwork. Eligible children would lose access to school meals, participation would drop, and the administrative burden on schools themselves would increase tremendously. Next slide, please. In case you're unfamiliar with what the income verification is or income documentation is required to submit when you are completing the school meal application and you are selected for verification, there is a variety of different sources of income that all is calculated and counted towards a household's income. Particularly for families who may be piecing together different income sources, this can become very confusing and very burdensome. So there's a lot of different pieces and sources of income that must be included when schools are doing that verification process. Next slide, please. The other proposal that we are closely monitoring is cuts to SNAP. Because the way CEP schools calculate their identified student percentage, and by using children who participate in SNAP and in most states Medicaid, any cut to SNAP or Medicaid that reduces the number of children participating in those programs would have a negative ripple effect on school meals. It would reduce the number of children that are automatically eligible or directly certified for free school meals. It would reduce schools' identified student percentages and therefore reduce CEP schools' federal reimbursement rates. So again, cuts to SNAP or Medicaid will result in fewer children being automatically eligible for school meals and more children falling through the cracks, which in turn will increase administrative burden on schools themselves. Next slide, please. We do have an action alert where you can go right in onto our website there, type in your name and your address, and you can send a letter, an email right to your federal representatives telling them to oppose any cuts to school meals. Feel free to take a look at it if you're interested in contacting your representatives and telling them to protect school meals. Next slide, please. Okay, get to some questions. I see an active chat and an active Q&A, so let's see. Oh, one question came in, says, I'm guessing it's too soon to have data on how many schools expanded CEP since the 25% eligibility threshold went into effect. So the short answer is yes, it's too soon. The longer answer is I am currently collecting that data from state agencies on CEP participation. So pay attention to later this spring, early summer, we should have a new report out. We will update our database and it will look at CEP eligibility and adoption at a variety of ISP levels. Our feeling, our inclination, because what we know based off the federal reimbursement is that the highest rates of adoption in those newly eligible schools, so in those schools between the 25% and 40% ISP, will be in states that subsidize CEP or subsidize school meals. So we expect to see the highest level of adoption in those lower eligibility levels in states that have healthy school meals for all policies, or in states like New York, Washington, Oregon, that subsidize the community eligibility provision. Because we know at that lower level, 25% identified students, most times the federal reimbursement is not enough to cover the cost of offering all students free school meals. There's a few questions related to the potential changes coming to CEP, the proposals that were put forth in the House through budget reconciliation, how that's going to impact states who offer universal school meals. Would states have to cover more of the costs? And the answer is, if schools receive less federal reimbursement, it's going to shift that cost to the state that's offering healthy school meals for all. So if schools lose access to CEP and they return to a traditional system of collecting applications and verifying children by household income, and doing that results in less federal reimbursement, then yes, that's going to cost the state more money to offer healthy school meals for all. Do you have any additional tips or strategies for grouping schools for CEP to maximize federal reimbursement? Should feeder schools always be grouped together, or are there other factors to consider when determining school groupings? Oh, there's always factors to consider when determining school groupings. This is really kind of the mastermind behind school nutrition professionals. School nutrition professionals are really smart business people when it comes to food service and managing tight budgets. So oftentimes what they'll do is they will work grouping scenarios, and there's plenty of tools. We have a grouping tool on our website to see if I group this school with this school, and this is the participation levels or the anticipated participation levels, what will my federal reimbursement be? And sometimes they will group schools to maximize federal reimbursement, and sometimes they'll group schools in that feeder system way so that they can provide that continuity of care, and it allows for easier communication with families. So the decision is really at the local level. Grouping and grouping flexibility is really at that school district level for what makes the most sense for that school nutrition operation and for the larger school community. I hope that answers that question. Regarding the cut eligibility date, is it true that based on preliminary 23-24 data, that may significantly overestimate the state data? I'm not 100% sure what your question is referring to if you want to type it back in again, but I will say when we did our data analysis, we only looked at schools that were already participating in CEP below the 60% threshold. So when we say over 24,000 schools, over 12 million children would lose access to community eligibility if that threshold was increased to 60%. That is only based on schools that were already participating last school year, 2023-2024. That was not including eligible schools that did not participate. So those numbers are based on participation for last school year. So continuing budget resolution. Yeah, so this gets a little wonky and confusing. The continuing resolution that passed is separate from budget resolution and budget reconciliation. So generally speaking, continuing resolution passed. That did not include changes to school meals. That is to continue to fund the government for the rest of this fiscal year. The budget reconciliation process is separate. That is still on the table. Congress is still debating exactly what programs are going to be cut to achieve the overall spending goals. Would income verification be required for direct certification students? No, income verification is not required for children who are directly certified because their income has already been verified through the other program. So when the child applies for SNAP, there is an income verification piece that it goes to get that SNAP application. Then schools and state agencies are leveraging data, matching that data, and that's how they're determining this child participates in SNAP, meaning his income's already been verified. He's automatically eligible for free school meals. So income verification only applies to the children who are approved for free and reduced price meals through the school meal application. So as people are asking for the research, we can include some research sources. There are fact sheets on our website. If you actually go to our Healthy School Meals for All website and you scroll down to the bottom of the page, there's a bunch of links and resources there. There is a research brief that cites the research and the high-level findings, and then you can find where it talks about CEP supporting food security, CEP changing the quality of home meals. So that's all on our website. I would look specifically on the Healthy School Meals for All microsite. I don't have specific dollar amounts for specific states. I'm sorry, I don't know that right now. So the question came in about which legislators might play a key role in opposing these or fighting back against changes and cuts. And I want to say, generally speaking, community eligibility provision has been embraced and adopted by schools across the country in every kind of community. So we see high community eligibility adoption in red states, blue states, purple states. We see it in rural areas. We see it in urban areas. So there is an understanding of the need to nourish our children. There is an understanding of the importance of school meals and how school meals strengthen children's health and academic achievement. So really, this is an issue for pretty much everybody. So I would encourage everyone to reach out to their legislators if you are interested in this issue and you really want to make sure your voice is heard and you want to make sure that your representative opposes cuts to school meals. Go ahead and reach out to them. It should be important to them as well. Okay, so question came in, can we reapply during our current CEP cycle? So yes, as I mentioned, a CEP cycle has been, is for 4 consecutive years. However, at any point during that 4 consecutive years, the school or the school district can rerun their numbers and restart that cycle. So if you are running your identified student percentage numbers, if you're doing your direct certification matches and you see your ISP going up, then I would definitely encourage you to reach out to your state agency and talk about restarting your cycle. Particularly if you are in a state that has recently adopted Medicaid direct certification, that is going to positively impact your identified student percentage, meaning your ISP is going to go up. And so I would work closely with your state agency to restart your cycle. They can help you, guide you through that process. Okay, so the data in our report and on our fact sheet is based on the 2023-2024 school year. As I mentioned, I don't have the data fully collected, analyzed, cleaned and analyzed yet for this school year, 2024-2025, although that data can be available. There are many school nutrition partners, there are many state agencies, there are many people working, directly with their state agency that have current year data. So I think that's what this question is asking about, the data, what year our data is, and the publicly available data. Our dashboard and our fact sheets and our reports are based on 2023, 2024. We are in the process of collecting it for this year, and we will get that out as soon as we can. A lot of questions. Sorry, guys, I'm trying to go through. Yeah, so I see a question in the chat about some states have an unknown in the database right now. That is a tech issue that we're working with our IT folks. If you would like to know what your ISP is for certain schools, the page prior to entering the database, the CEP resource page, has an Excel file that you can download and you can filter and look through your state that way, and it will have your ISP in there. Anything to answer that? The 60%, the proposal that looks to increase the identified student percentage, the eligibility to 60% is before the multiplier. That's before the multiplier. So that's the actual identified student percentage. Right now, schools are able to participate if 25% of their enrollment are identified students. The proposal would move that to 60%, meaning that only schools that got nearly 100% federal free reimbursement, because 60 times 1.6 is very close to 100, would be eligible to participate. Sorry, guys. There is a lot of questions here, and we have a minute left. Data is pulled by April 1st. So yes, again, this is CEP season, right? So schools are using April 1st data, so about a little more than a week and a half. They're going to use April 1st data to determine whether or not they are eligible to adopt CEP for next school year. Schools will analyze that data and they'll decide by June 30th whether or not they want to adopt CEP for next school year. I highly doubt budget reconciliation will happen before April 1st. So I think it's Matt here in the chat. I don't think they'll pass budget reconciliation before April 1st. It could be a few months of a process. There's no clear timeline. I don't have like by this date budget reconciliation passes. That's not really how it works, but I don't think it'll pass by April 1st. I don't know for sure, but I don't think it'll pass. All right, guys, I am sorry. I know that there are still a lot of questions here. We will send out the slides. To everyone. There will be a recording, and you can always email me. Next slide, please, Steve. Okay, I'm going to drop my email in the chat here. It's ehysom, EHYSOM @frac.org. Feel free to email me with any of your follow-up questions. I apologize to anyone I didn't get to their questions. I'd be happy to send out additional resources, and we can chat about messaging or anything that you may want to know more about. So thank you for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful spring. Thanks so much.